with President Zelensky on the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has been turned back, in which the United States has assisted Ukraine in turning it back. Headline, Washington Post, Biden makes surprise trip to Ukraine ahead of Russian invasion anniversary. This is headline in the Wall Street Journal. President Biden visits Ukraine for first time since Russia's invasion. And then the New York Times, President Biden visit Kyiv, Ukraine's besieged capital. There's no New York Times reporter with President Biden in Kyiv. There is, however, a couple of Washington Post reporters there, so I go to their story. President Biden made a dramatic, unannounced visit to Kyiv on Monday in a display of strong American support for Ukraine, just 4 days before the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. The high-risk visit to a Ukrainian capital that has been under threat of missile attack signals continued commitment from the United States, the largest financial and military backer of Ukraine's efforts to repel Russian invaders from its territory. Biden was spotted outside St. Michael's Golden Dome Monastery with Ukrainian President Zelensky. The Ukrainian capital was in a security lockdown with car traffic halted, even pedestrians blocked from certain streets. Shortly afterwards, an air raid siren went off in the city. It's very dramatic. It may be the most memorable moment of the Biden presidency to date, and I applaud the president for doing this. Supermajorities of Americans support our support for Ukraine. I am among them. It is the front line in the world division between China, Russia, Iran, and the free world, with a bunch of people on the sidelines, including every other day Germany. But the West supports Ukraine, and every Russian tank, missile, plane shot down, every Russian soldier killed is one more blow to that axis of evil in the 21st century. And President Bush, in those dire days after and months after 9/11, called the axis of evil Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. Well, this is axis of evil 2.0, and it's much stronger: China, Russia, Iran. My phone number is 1-800-520-1234. On this President's Day, I'll run through the news, but I'd like to know what you think of President Biden in Ukraine. I am 100% in favor of it. I'll be joined later by Selena Zito, by Josh Kroshauer, by Leland Vittert of News Nation. We're just very thrilled that all of the plans came together. The president took a secret train from Poland to Kyiv. I'm sure he's going to be out of there very quickly. It's going to really make Putin have an aneurysm. And it's the kind of thing that Joe Biden can do, because it doesn't involve giving a speech or wrestling with a teleprompter. He just has to walk around with Zelensky, and the Ukrainians will take heart. The capital that was supposed to be seized in a week is still standing a year later, and indeed, Russia's losses have been extraordinary. Poland called for NATO security guarantees to a post-war Ukraine. Now, Poland matters a lot to us. It's our strongest, most able ally on the border of the Soviet Union, although I am certainly hoping that Finland and Sweden join NATO, and then Finland will be like Poland, the frontline ally that has the most to risk and the most to offer in terms of forward defense. More on that in a moment. Dave Zavagno is a friend of mine in Cleveland, and since it's President's Day, I want to read you an email he sent to me yesterday. Hugh, I've met President Carter and spoken with him and continue to be an active contributor to his charity. One needs to search far and wide to find a more compassionate, hardworking, knowledgeable, and kind person. The hands-on building work he championed, the work with guinea worm disease, and the active charitable leadership he provided to many causes is very impressive. His recovery from brain cancer years ago is amazing. Most importantly, his personal negotiations and relentless pursuit of a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel stands alone as one of the greatest achievements in diplomacy over the past 50 years. Yes, he was a poor president, surrounded by the inept, and the press used Billy as their piñata daily. One of the many rebound presidents we have elected who struggled mightily in office and then did well in post-presidency years. All Americans should pause and pay their respects to the man Jimmy Carter and his achievements. I trust you can help inform your audience in these contentious times as to the man and the humanitarian he is and the good he did for so many, many people worldwide. Dave Zavagno. Dave is 100% correct. I had the honor of interviewing former President Carter on a book tour when he made to L.A. in 1994 when I was hosting the Nightly News and Public Affairs show there for PBS Life and Times, which ran for a decade. And he was gentle. He was wonderful. He was terrific. In the post-presidency years, he did what HW and W have done, which is raise money for a lot of people, do a lot of good things for a lot of people, spend time with your family, don't bag to. Now, he's made some missteps in his post, but not perfect. He's gone partisan. He's like his human rights policy during 77 to 81 when he was president, just occasional face plants. But the man is a legend for helping the homeless, building houses, Habitat for Humanity. He's a good man. And I salute him and pray for him and for his family as he enters hospice care this President's Day. Speaking of this President's Day, big New York Times piece, which I'll discuss in the Grand Old Pod later. The Grand Old Pod will be available at the Universe. I hope you are a subscriber to Universe. 5 days a week, we give you exclusive content on there, and today's President's Day show is a good one, and I encourage you to tune into it. It will be about President Biden in Ukraine and about Nikki Haley on the Sunday shows yesterday and Kamala Harris sitting down in the safe space for all Democrats, the only place they can go anymore, MSNBC. New York Times, Biden drawing up a 2024 playbook that looks a lot like the 2020 playbook. I'll talk about that in the Grand Old Pod. Nikki Haley walks treacherous road for GOP women. How absurd. I'll talk about that in the Grand Old Pod. Let's go to the news over the weekend. My phone number, by the way, is 1-800-520-1234. If you have a comment on President Biden being in Ukraine, 1-800-520-1234. Now, when President Bush went to Iraq in 2003 to serve Thanksgiving to the troops, that was bold. That was a war zone. That was bold. This is the same thing. Subsequent trips by President Bush and President Obama and President Biden have not been the same thing. We had a better idea of what was going on. But W showing up in Baghdad and Biden showing up in Kyiv, they're just what presidents do. And yes, it's dangerous. Winston Churchill used to go to the top of number 10 when the bombs fell in Great Britain during the Blitz. And so physical courage is part of the deal. And I salute the president. Blinken and China's top diplomat. He's their foreign minister, Wang Yi, met on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. And the Chinese immediately announced it and said, we asked for the meeting and we looked weak again. Biden has tense meeting with Chinese officials amid spy balloon furor. Tense meeting means that Wang Yi yelled at Blinken again like he did in Alaska. U.S. warns China not to supply lethal aid to Russia. Not sure they care what this administration says. They've judged them, and they've judged them weak. In satellite images and video, hidden clues about an Iranian Air Force upgrade. Turns out the Iranians are going to buy from Russia the Su-35, their most advanced fighter plane. Look, it's China, Russia, Iran against the world. I do want to bring you up to speed on Sweden warning NATO against decoupling its NATO bid from Finland. Erdogan needs gazillions of dollars to rebuild this country. We were happy to help him do that, and we're happy to help other countries rebuild. But Erdogan has to stop screwing NATO. NATO is about NATO, not about Turkey's problems with its domestic issues. There are other stories out there, including the butchering of Ronald Dahl's books by a woke elite. Wokeism has descended into publishing. I want to remind everyone, yesterday's political items. I read two newsletters every day, news items by John Ellis and political items from John Ellis. Substack subscriptions, I like the product so much I actually invested in it because it's real news. It's just the summary of the news. Yesterday, John circulated a summary of about a half dozen polls from various places. And the one that stuck in my mind, I went and found it and just put it out on Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter, I wish you would. I do mostly straight news plus the Browns, Guardians, Cavs, and the Ohio State University Buckeyes. Yesterday, Ellis, political items. Nearly 1 year into the war between Russia and Ukraine, American support for Ukraine holds steady. A stable 65% of U.S. adults prefer that the United States support Ukraine in reclaiming its territory, even if that results in a prolonged conflict. Meanwhile, 31% continue to say they would rather see the U.S. work to end the war quickly, even if this allows Russia to keep the territory that it has occupied in Ukraine. I am with the 65% and believe that, as President Reagan did with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan throughout the 80s, we ought to be doing with Ukraine whatever they need. Give them the tools, they'll finish the job. People agree and disagree. Richard in South Carolina. Good morning, Richard. You've been waiting the longest. Let's start with you. How are you? Happy President's Day.
Happy President's Day. I agree with you, Hugh. I'm not a supporter of Biden, but I'm glad he's there. And we should never forget that in the early 90s, at the end of the Cold War, Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons to the United States, and which kept them out of the hands of terrorists. And we should do everything we can to support that country, because I tell you, they're fighting that war. And if we're not careful and we don't support them, we'll probably all be in a big war soon. So I certainly am happy that Biden went there to support Ukraine at the one-year anniversary.
I think it's the strongest moment of his presidency.
I agree.
And it's not there aren't many of those to pick from, but you're absolutely right. The tip of the sword right now in the war of freedom against totalitarianism is on the front line in Ukraine, where free people are fighting against the axis that is China, Russia, Iran, and not China particularly, but the Chinese Communist Party, not Russia, but Putin and his gang, and not the Iranian people, but the mullahs at the center of it. Richard, thank you. Let's go to Chicago and Gary. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Good morning. I don't think this has anything to do with Ukraine and their position with NATO. This is totally regarding Russia and stopping their aggression. And I wish the administration would see that this is an opportunity to possibly shut down Russia for good without expending one American soldier if they would just give the Ukrainians everything they needed. And I think it is good to see Biden go to Ukraine.
I think it's the finest moment of his presidency on President's Day.
Yeah, I just wish they would see the opportunity to possibly shut down Russia for good.
Yeah, or actually convert it to a modern European nation. I was reading a long story on Putin yesterday, and they're reverting to complete Stalinist thuggery, and he thinks he's a czar. And I just put this on my Twitter feed. AP just reported President Biden announced another $500 million in aid, which is great, but no more advanced weaponry, no new advanced They need fighters that they can fly. We've got them.
I totally agree.
We've got them. Our NATO allies have them, and the Pentagon, under President Biden's orders, will not send them. So it's like fight with one hand behind your back. I do not understand it, but I applaud him going, and it will certainly have a great impact. Thank you, Gary, for listening in Chicago this morning. Harry in Pittsburgh. Good morning, Harry. How are you?
Very fine. Thank you. After 20 years in Afghanistan and then the surrender, leaving behind $80+ billion of our weapons, and you think we should be giving F-16s to Ukraine? Who's going to fly them? Who's going to maintain?
Oh, I mean, they got that. If they can't fly them, you don't give them. But it's not the world. They've got already fighter pilots who are flying advanced planes. They're just not as good as the F-16. And that I'm not saying the F-22 and technology that can be lost. And I don't think it in any way obscures that. I don't know how much we left in Afghanistan, but it was a lot, and we left a lot of blood and treasure there. And mostly it's the blood that bothers me. And we left a lot of allies there. And that's why Putin, I think, invaded Ukraine, is because he saw our reaction in Afghanistan. But Harry, the two aren't connected, except this is an American display of strength. And Afghanistan was the worst display of collapse since Vietnam.
We just spent $1.2 million shooting down 3 weather balloons.
Hey, we don't know that. Harry, we don't know that. You don't know that. I don't know that. We don't know what they were. One of them is at the bottom of Lake Huron. And it was a terrible execution of an important strategy. And we let the Chinese spy machine coast over the United States and send all the data back to the CCP. Then we shot it down. And that was stupid. Turns out we shot at it in Montana and couldn't bring it down. So there's a question about the Pentagon's competence here as well. But this is, when you have a $31 trillion debt, we're not talking about real money here. You want to fix the real money problem, you got to fix entitlements. You want to fix entitlements, it's going to have to be bipartisan and a virgin birth. But it's got nothing to do with supporting Ukraine. The cost of a war would be a lot more if he engages Poland or any of the NATO allies. But I appreciate the call. Robert in Delaware, 1-800-520-1234. What do you say, Robert?
Yeah, Hugh, I guess my concern is can we get to this sort of like a Yalta moment about what's going to go on in Russia with some people behind the scenes who are going to cut the legs out from underneath Putin because, before we have World War III, what's going to happen first?
Well, you're right to be worried about that. I want to draw your attention to a Robin Dixon story in yesterday's Washington Post. Putin, czar with no empire, needs military victory for his own survival. And I am worried about escalation because I think Putin is nuts. And I do worry about that. But I think the likeliest way to deter him from ever using his nukes or anything to end up with World War III is to fight him on the front line in the Donbass. Their military is getting eviscerated and maybe even decimated. And I mean the old Latin sense, 1 out of 10 Russian soldiers dead. The body count is extraordinary. Their losses are so savage and huge because they're just throwing conscripts and prisoners into the front lines where it didn't work. They didn't train their people. Their military is being shut back, but he still has a nuclear weapon. You're right to worry about it, Robert. You're right to worry about it. But the best way to keep Putin in check is to beat him in Ukraine. Thank you, Robert. Randy in Tennessee. Good morning, Randy. Which part of Tennessee? Are you in Knoxville?
I'm in Knoxville. I'm actually in a bedroom community, Corryton, Tennessee, and that's the home of PFC Knaus, who was killed in the withdrawal, one of the 13. I'm just 3
sorry to hear
miles
that.
from his high school. They've renamed Tazewell Pike the Ryan Knaus Memorial Highway.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. You heard the Gold Star Father earlier. Maybe you heard them call in on this president, reminding us of the 13 Americans at the very end. I mean, we've more than 7,000 Americans died in Iraq and Afghanistan, tens of thousands wounded. That's why we do the Semper Fi Fund show every Memorial Day and every Veterans Day to take care of the troops who got injured in the long wars. But what do you think about Ukraine, Randy?
I am very worried about poking Russia in the eye and seeing that maybe somebody like Putin could do something horrible to us for engaging in a proxy war with the Russians. I don't know, Hugh. I'm a conservative Republican because Republican Party is the home of conservatism. I'm a little R with a big C. Man, 22 years of nonstop war. You just said all those poor our troops that got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and with no disrespect, because God love them, and I sure do, what did it get us? And what
it got us a lot in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords, a unified front against Iran, and a long-term deterrent there. We didn't. Oh yeah, we've got the Abraham Accords with the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco, and we will soon have Saudi in there aligned with
Israel.
And
now we have a puppet regime run by the Iranians where all of our guys got killed. And
that is true, and I do believe the problem of Iran is a clarifying moment. Iran is, though, a country of wonderful people being ruled by a theocracy, and they killed our boys, and we killed Soleimani, and Trump had the right idea about bankrupting them. But we got to look at the world as it is, and we could have done things better. 2020 hindsight is perfect, but it doesn't mean we turn our eyes away from what's going on right now in the world.
We're asking for trouble, Hugh.
No, I'm not. I'm doing Ronald Reagan. You said
Russians, when we wake up one day and we've got an EMP or a nuke going off in New York City, nobody's going to be letting me paint their house because we want to get involved with a bunch of Ukrainians, the most corrupt country.
Okay, Randy, you're going off target here. I am with you. I do not want any American troops killed in Ukraine. The best way to secure America is if you are a small R, large C, go with the Reagan doctrine, peace through strength, and do what Reagan did. Never engage Russia directly. Do it through proxies and do it through weaponry. And this is Reagan 2.0 policy. Poorly executed by Biden and Blinken, but nevertheless, it's still the same policy. Thank you, Randy. Alan in Ohio. Go ahead, Alan.
Good morning. Happy President's Day to you.
And to you, sir.
Here's a question for you and the large number of people. Are you ready to go and meet the Russians head on? Because that's what we're doing.
No, we don't want a war with Russia.
we are doing this as a proxy. This is the same way when we went in and sent the little green men, as JFK said, into South Vietnam. This is going to be
no, it's not. We are doing what Reagan did.
I went into Kandahar.
Yeah, but Alan, stay with me through the break. So you don't have to rush. This is not the little green men, because we are not sending American troops to Ukraine.